Why Jacob? Why Israel? Of all of our patriarchs, the one who we use to name the people of Israel is Israel. We are Am Yisrael. Yes, we are Jewish, which stems from our connection to the land of Judea. An argument can be made that we are linked to the descendant of Jacob, his son Judah. But even if we take that as significant, you can't dismiss that compared to Abraham, compared to Isaac, right? The name Israel carries with it power. And what I want to explore is why. Why are we named after Israel? What is it that his name teaches us? What is it that his name embodies in who we are as a people and perhaps who we strive to be? If you open up your Humashim to page 199, page 199, we're going to see a very interesting verse that comes out of this week's parashah. And it's page 199, verse 8. Vayira Yaakov me'od, vayetzer lo, vayachatz et ta'am asher ito, ve'et hatzon, ve'et habakar, ve'agmalim lishnei machanot. And in English we read, Jacob was greatly frightened. In his anxiety, he divided the people with him and the flocks and herds and camels, and into two camps, thinking, if Esau comes to one camp and attacks it, the other camp may yet escape. What is Jacob doing in this verse? How would you describe the actions of Jacob right here? Diana? Yeah?
He's preparing. Well, we had talked a little bit about this on Wednesday.
Yeah.
Please join our lunch and learn.
Yeah.
But he was preparing for all different types of scenarios here. So in this one, he's afraid. I mean, he is physically afraid, he's spiritually afraid. There might be a lot of things going into that, but the actions that he's taking might be sort of to mitigate that fear a little bit. So he's dividing his camp into two, like, okay, if they get one, I'll still have the other one, thinking that Esau could really be going for the worst, and he doesn't really know what's going to happen. There's SAR, like trouble, like, SARS.
I'm going to capture two of the things you shared, Diana. One is he's preparing. He's preparing for this encounter with Esau, who is his brother. Okay? And when last we met, Jacob met Esau, how would you describe that relationship? We're laughing. Complicated. Okay? His brother swears he's going to kill him if he sees him again. Okay? God forbid we should encounter that with our siblings. Okay? So he's preparing for this encounter, and he is afraid. This is the patriarch that we are named after. Preparation and fear. Anyone else? What else are you seeing in this verse? Okay, well, I'm going to go with what Diana went with. Okay, I think we can all see the word vayira, that there's fear. And our commentators actually note that the next word, yetzar, is actually repetitive. That there's fear and anxiety. And Rashi describes a midrash that says that Jacob was torn at this time. That on one hand, he was worried that he was going to be harmed. On the other hand, he was worried that he was going to cause harm. And I was reading the commentary of Rabbi Shai Held, and he notes that this midrash actually has multiple manuscripts. One says the primary concern, and this is the more traditional answer, is that he is worried about himself. He's about to go face someone who sought to kill him or aspired to kill him last time that he saw him. So he's worried about himself, and we can understand he's got self-interest. He wants to make sure that he's safe. And then He is similarly concerned that he doesn't want to cause harm. The other manuscript flips it. His primary concern is that he, Jacob, does not want to cause harm, because if there is a conflict, he would have to stand up for himself or have his messengers defend him, and he'd be responsible for that violence. And then, small chance he might lose, and he doesn't want to bear the consequence of losing his own life. In either one of these scenarios, there's an aversion of Jacob to deal with violence. And I think that shouldn't be lost on us, that our namesake is concerned about violence, and he has fear for that violence. And this is actually a theme in Judaism, that there's an aversion to violence. Very interesting midrash that comes in related to the laws of Shabbat. Question is asked, can you carry your sword around, from place to place when you are observing Shabbat? Now, by the way, it's actually a fair question. We're not dealing in the day and age of electricity, and when you have to go from one place to the next, you don't know if bandits are going to approach you. It's fair enough. You should have some protection. And one rabbi says, hey, I think this is fair. Why? Because we are allowed to wear belts and rings, adornments that are part of our clothing, and it's fair to say that a sword is something that we should carry with us as part of our regular clothing, especially when we travel outside. Therefore, it should be allowed to be carried on Shabbat. The rabbis totally shoot, I think it's Rabbi Eliezer, totally shoot him down. Say, no, no, no. And I think there's something there in the conversation of, hey, yes, it's realistic to assume that weapons should be a part of our regular clothing attire. But on Shabbat, it's different. Because Shabbat is viewed as an aspirational time where we view the world as it should be, or as an idyllic place, as how we want it to be. And therefore, how could we live in a world, an ideal world, where we are carrying with us tools of violence? Similarly, actually, in the building of the temple, there is a midrash that iron was not used, because that can be used for violence, and therefore it was not a part of the construction of the idyllic temple. We can welcome in, we have a baby naming coming up, a little foreshadowing, so we welcome the Bakal family as they come in. We're about to celebrate the holiday of Hanukkah. And in the holiday of Hanukkah, we know about the victory of the Maccabees. And what do the rabbis do with this military victory of the Maccabees? Standing up to the Roman Empire, the Greek Empire, no small military feat. The rabbis say, actually, we're going to light this menorah for the spiritual victory that we did on that day. And even if you think about the main product of the great invention of the Jewish people in our day and age, the state of Israel, two of the original Zionist rabbis who believed in the Jewish people living in the land of Israel, Rabbi Kook, and I believe the other rabbi's name was Rabbi Ninus. When thinking about what it would mean to have a state, Rav Kook had a very interesting take. He said, there actually is probably a reason why we lived in diaspora. And for him, he makes this bold statement and says the reason the Jewish people lived in diaspora because they knew what it would take to maintain a state, which would mean to have their own military. And that goes against this aversion of violence founded by Jacob or Israel. And therefore, diaspora allows us not to have a military, to be reliant on others. And Rabbi Ninus says, if you have to choose between being a people of the book and a people of the sword, you always choose to be a people of the book. Now, it's very interesting. Rav Kook and Rav Ninus, they're turn-of-the-century scholars and rabbis. They had no idea what awaited us 40 years later in the dark period of World War II. It's almost a moment where, for our modern times, where the rubber really started to meet the road. And Rav Kook's son, who later it became known as a prominent Zionist rabbi, changed from his father's tradition and said, actually, a military for a Jewish state is as sacred as all the other elements of a state because they are all there to maintain a place of Kedusha and a place of holiness. So I want to bring this to our attention. As you can see this theme of an aversion to violence going throughout the Jewish people, and we might think that, this is the tradition of Jacob, and this is our calling as a Jewish people. But at the same time, if we're a Jewish people committed to living in this world, perhaps we need to look at Jacob's actions slightly differently. And I want to go back to that Midrash of Rashi. Because in the Midrash of Rashi that he quotes, there's actually a tension. The tension is between protecting oneself, a physical protection, and the other is, when we are concerned about killing others, a moral protection. And sometimes those two things are in tension with each other. And we can't avoid that by stepping away and pretending that that tension cannot exist, that we don't live in a world where people could cause us harm, while at the same time we don't live in a world where military acts can't lead to painful repercussions on our psychological well-being. This week, by the way, it should be noted that under the Ken's hospitality, the Kens, they have underwritten this program, but we are hosting in our Beit Midrash a group of soldiers from the IDF that are here for a week of retreat, of psychological healing and counseling as they deal with the consequences of their work protecting the land of Israel, which again is so necessary and so sacred. So there is a tension when you live in a real world that you cannot avoid or we have to deal with. And now I want to bring it back to Jacob. He was afraid, vayira, and he has a vayetzer. Maybe what Jacob had was a fear of the tension. He knew to live in this world there was going to be a tension between protecting ourselves and not making immoral choices. And it's not clear, and there is a gray, and it's difficult because the consequences on both sides can be overwhelming. But rather than avoid, he chooses to embrace fear. I read into this fear a sense of discomfort in accepting the world as it is and not avoiding it. And perhaps that is why we are called the nation of Israel. And that is our sacred task to bring to the world, to live in tension, and to know this tension doesn't make us comfortable, but perhaps in our discomfort we can find a redemption. Shabbat Shalom.